podcast, everybody. Welcome to this week's cast that we have. As you know, I co-host the session with Vito, and it's a weekly get-together for e-commerce, fraud, and risk professionals to swap intel on the latest fraud and consumer abuse trends that you guys are seeing. It's a great place to crowdsource some ideas and solutions to the cases that are probably sitting in your queues right now. And it's a really great opportunity to build a network that you can tap into when you need it. So throughout the session, I see we might be getting some new people. I'm just giving a quick overview. Welcome. Throughout the session, feel free to drop your thoughts, comments, questions, stories in the chat. We love when you guys participate with us. I feel like we get the real value when you guys are part of the conversation with us. It's not supposed to be just kind of like we're talking at you. So please feel free to participate in the chat. Be part of the conversation. If at any point you would like the mic, feel free to raise your hand or even just come off mute and be like, hey, Vito, I want to talk about this or have this question. So feel free to do that. And just heads up, we do record these sessions for folks who are not able to join us. A lot of people are out on vacations. It's the summer holidays. They're not able to join us. So we share those recordings out later just for them to catch up on what they missed. And then also we share these recordings to kind of build and get more dogfighting people like you to join our community and get some more thoughts and ideas into the room and provide more value to you guys. So just keep that in mind. And as we are kind of getting things going, I'm going to hand things over to Vito to introduce our guest that we have with us today. But as we're kind of settling in, please do introduce yourselves in the chat. Even if you've joined us before, please do introduce yourself for some of the new people. Don't be a stranger. We want to make sure that it feels like we're talking to you guys. We're getting to know one another, and it's not just a bunch of floating heads and names that we're staring at. So please do introduce yourself, name, title, company, where you're calling from, and drop your LinkedIn to connect with others as well. And with that being said, I'm going to hand things over to Vito.
What is up, y'all? Happy Wednesday. Welcome back. I am in a much safer non-TSA territory. I have way more than like 3 ounces of water or whatever it is here. Shh, don't tell anybody. I'm super, super excited for today. I'm super excited for all of us. I would love to see where this conversation goes because we have a guest on the Fraudcast today who almost needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway for him. This individual touts 20 years, 2 big old decades in our game, 20 years working in fraud, spanning merchant, payment network, card issuer, solution provider, covering the entire waterfront. He's got fraud expertise, payments expertise, product managing expertise, product marketing expertise. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for my friend, one of the greats, someone I tip my hat to, Coby Montoya. Coby, how you doing, brother?
Great. Yeah.
Awesome. So there's so much to talk about, y'all. I had this like sound effect thing planned, but let's do a little theater of the imagination. Imagine, if you will, being out in the West, in the prairies. The wind is blowing, the grain is rustling about you, and you are on a Conestoga wagon with eight eight uh 8 horses dragging you through a chicka 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 chicka, right? I feel like we are all on that wagon right now, headed west for parts unknown, not just in e-commerce in general, but what's around the horizon, my friends. Our favorite 4-letter word, BFCM, Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Believe it or not, it's not too far away. So with that being said, I've got one of the greats in the business to talk about kind of where we're headed, where we've come from, what we should kind of bring with us and leave behind, and what might be waiting for us on the horizon. So before we get into all the heady stuff, and by the way, Jenna said, like, raise your hand if you want to talk. Jenna, much love, but just come off mute. Just jump on in. We're here. We're all family. Coby, why don't we get us started? I gave you a little bit of an intro, but what's it been like for you? 20 years of doing this. Did you dream about this? Was this something you were just kind of like conscripted into? How's that been?
Yeah. Great question. So I started in fraud in 2004, 2005. I just happened to join a customer or take on a customer service job in a call center 5 minutes from where my dad lived, right? This call center happened to be a company called GSI Commerce. And GSI Commerce was this early outsourced provider for e-commerce companies. A year into that role, I transferred to a team that reviewed orders for fraud. And that's how I kind of accidentally got into it. But I stayed in it just because of the nature of pace of change. It's always changing, and there's always a problem to solve. And so that's kind of the little origin story. And since then, as you mentioned in the intro, I've sort of solved fraud problems at Discovered Network, at PayPal, American Express, Sift recently. So yeah, I'm really passionate about the space.
It comes through. And with that being said, I have a question for you because there's been some debate around this. I think I know where you might fall on it, but I too came up through customer service, being on the phones. Do you think there's a plus and perhaps a simultaneous negative in terms of fraud fighters who come up from that customer support world? Has it enabled you to do or think a little bit differently? Have you had to forget what you've learned a little bit there? I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, so I'm obviously biased, right? I have a strong appreciation for quantitative analytics, right? Yeah, machine learning, AI, of course, it's not the future, it's the present. But it's a great question because when I talk to fraud professionals, I used to do a lot of deal support, right? I'll get on a call with an account executive and help them show how my employer was different from the competition. If I looked up a LinkedIn and I saw someone had a data science background, I'm talking false positives, and I'm talking math and statistics. If I saw they came up in customer experience or ops, I'm talking implications of customers. It's more emotional, right? To a data scientist, false positives are false positives, right? They're always there. To a customer service professional, if you take it seriously, every customer matters, right? And so I do think having the lens of being front lines with customers, I feel like it adds more of the human element. And I think that's very important for risk professionals to understand that behind every false positive, behind every decline, there's an actual human being that wanted to do business with you, and having that firsthand experience goes a long way for that.
You bring up the human element, and we might be jumping around a bit here, but y'all know me by now. I wonder, before we get to the future and the Wild West and all that, you mentioned that AI is now. For so many of us here who are working in fraud prevention, I think that there's a lot of worry about automation in general and whether or not we will be reallocated, repurposed, or perhaps just go the way of the dodo bird. It's a big question. I'm just wondering how you feel about, kind of the future of the fraud professional. Before we go into the future of e-commerce and fraud and authentication, think about for our space. Um, do you see it perhaps returning to something a little more human, or do you see it really just going full science, full, data, or maybe there's a bit of both? I would love to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely a bit of both. In my personal life and even in business, I sort of subscribe to non-duality, right? So marketing duality it works great in marketing, where it's like this is it's the old infomercial approach. It's black and white. You're opening your kitchen cabinet, things are falling off on you. Now it's color. You have a clean organizational whatever. So that works, right? It's a human hack. It's very simplified. But the reality is, usually one technology doesn't completely replace everything. And if you go back to 2012, when all these companies were being, coming to market, Sift, Feed's Eye, Simility, they're all, AI, rules are dead. And then they all added rule builders because, AI, ML wasn't perfect. So I think, of course, it's much different than 2012. Brian Davis posted something that really stuck with me, and it was use generative AI for documentation, not decisioning. And I think that was very well put. I think right now the real value prop is summarizing things for humans, but at the decision aspect, the implications of declining too much are just too great to trust generative AI at its state today. 10 years from now, I'm not even going to try to speculate 10 years from now, but I think in the short term future, I don't see humans being replaced at scale by AI.
Yeah, there's going to be a whole different kind of set. I'm excited to work more with AI. And I think some of those, let's just call it spiritual components of being someone who talks to people on the phone and knows the customer. I think that's just going to be an awesome little connection there. So let's get on the wagon then real quick. Like you're mentioning things that happened in 2011, 2010, perhaps like, the earlier days of this. What do you think we've left in the past that was worth leaving in the past, in terms of how we do our job, how we fight crime online, how we protect the bottom line, drive revenue, and all that? What are some things you brought up? The infomercials. I always think about that 50s like weight loss thing that's like two leather belts kind of going on you. What has been, when you look back at that time, what is that little weight loss thing that we all could laugh at?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So okay, so yeah, going back to my early fraud analyst days, right? I would call a number to a card network like Visa. I would input a BIN number, right, to get a phone number for an issuing bank. I'll call the issuing bank and I'll say, hey, I'm a merchant calling for, verification, name, address, phone verification. What's your merchant ID? Here's my merchant ID. Okay, name is this. Okay, address is this. Okay, phone is this. Does this match? Yes, no. Oh, phone doesn't match. I'm going to, this is pre white pages, I'm going to public site whitepages.com. Is a phone number, is a different phone number. All right, let me call back the bank. Does this phone number match? That's, I definitely feel like that should be left behind. If anyone's doing that today, they should stop immediately, because by the nature of social engineering scams, like that's just not going to be effective. Like no customer should trust a stranger calling them and asking for information. I mean, best practice is hang up, call the number on the back of the card, call the number from the website. It's just not practical anymore. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
And what about something from those halcyon days that is still in the toolbox? Like, have you taken or refined something from your early days? It's like, oh man, this was good in the beginning, and perhaps now it's even better with the cooler tool set. The more data I've got, the more tech I've got. Would love to know.
Yeah, I think I hear a lot of people sort of discount data that was still used back then that is relevant today, like IP address, right? So I've had so many debates with people about IP address, and I've had people tell me, I was at PayPal and talking to a merchant, someone's like, because they weren't sending an IP address, and they're like, IP address doesn't matter because you could just change your IP address. And I was like, okay, well, what about the people that are not changing their IP address? What about the certain demographics that are not using VPNs? So I think discounting any data that can be predictive is a mistake. And as new technologies are introduced, for marketing reasons, they're positioned against old ways, former approaches. But just one example of IP address, my home Wi-Fi network. A lot of times I'm not using a VPN for certain things, and a company can still detect that it's me, right? Now, is the value of IP address, degraded? It has it decayed over time? Yeah, absolutely. But just because it's decayed, should we stop using it? No, I don't think so. So, ABS is another example, right? So ABS is like, people say, "Hey, ABS it's dumb to use ABS." It's like, well, no, it's not a great idea to decline something based on ABS response, but as a discrete signal, it's still it's still very useful. So I think where companies or company or people make mistakes is just because something was used 15 years ago doesn't mean it's no longer relevant. You just have to think about it differently.
So there's a little bit of hype then, and it's funny that hype gets into signals. I didn't think about it that way. It's like, who's using ABS these days? The losers are. You don't want to be with the losers. But I'm from my experience, if I could chime in, like I think you're absolutely spot on. AVS as a broad indicator of something being good or bad, but AVS in conjunction with perhaps more sophisticated signals can get you in the ballpark of what to do. We bring up these old tools, but like manual review, for instance, like where's that at now for you after all you've seen? I mean, there's probably going to be a little bit of good and bad, but like, what is the future of manual review, or like, where are the use cases that manual review, should be used? I would love to hear your, because that's a stalwart of the old days, right?
Yeah, yeah. Manual review gets a bad rap, right? And so I think it's important to sort of like agree on what does manual review mean, right? Before talking about it. So manual review can mean two things that, in my experience, manual review can be live transaction review, right? So a transaction is in a hold state before being sent to fulfillment, and someone literally has to press a button. I see that as like definitely on its way out, and it's needed in some cases. But then there's manual review as what I look at as in the field intelligence, right? So the best fraud teams I've ever worked on or with, they have a very tight relationship between ops and then strategy, right? So any company that has an ops team, if they're not looking at what the ops team is doing, if they're not asking, what are your hypotheses? What are your theories? And then trying to take those human hypotheses and put them in an automation component, it's a huge missed opportunity. So I see manual review teams or ops teams as field intelligence informing the folks that are building automation controls. And I think that is not going to go away. What will go away is, we're going to hold your transaction until someone presses a button, except for very, very niche, cases. If someone is doing a $500,000, wire transfer, yeah, I think a human should look at it, right? If someone's ordering some socks, no, a human, shouldn't be looking at that.
I want to double tap on that ops strategy connection there. If because I know, and by the way, I'm saying this for all the folks on the call, myself included. And if you're one of the folks on the call who finds any of this interesting, which you obviously do, this is very interesting stuff, please come off mute. And Ryan, I know we've got a question for you. Before we get to Ryan's question, Coby, that connection between, risk and ops or ops and strategy, if you could give a little more detail into that. I'm thinking what I got out of that was we have a thesis. We're going to kind of gather data on that thesis, perhaps do some shadow rules, or there's something that isn't directly implementing decisioning, maybe some A/B testing on what we consider to be risky and see if it plays out, kind of figuring out how much underwriting margin we have to play with in order to do that. Am I in the ballpark? I would love to hear, a little more detail there.
Yeah, yeah. So when I first started working with more, professional data scientists, I would ask for a data set like an Excel or something like that. And a lot of times, like, what are you going to do with 100 transactions? Like, this is not, it's meaningless. And I had to explain, like, I'm going to review these transactions, yeah, manually. I am going to take an hour and a half to look at things, and I'm going to come up with a hypothesis. So, like, maybe we're declining something or we're approving something we shouldn't be, and the human can spot a trend, and you can see that, okay, they're using VPNs, and it's triggering velocity or something like that. And so someone that is looking for the hypothesis, eventually what they should do is you sort of document those hypotheses. They give it back to the data scientist. Data scientist validates it at scale. And it doesn't mean, it's not like, hey, you're right or wrong. It's this constant experimentation. So kind of combining both disciplines, sort of the human research, trying to find the story behind the transaction, then giving it to a quantitative expert and having them validate at scale. That's the ideal approach. And real quick, I'll just add one more thing. Another way to think about it, some manual review analyst agents, what they're doing is what I'll call red flag and green flag counting, right? Customer tenure 0, red flag. ABS and red flag. Lowest product, green flag. And so that's a very binary, sort of transactional way to think about it. And I know a lot of companies are still doing that. Whereas instead it should be, what's my hypothesis of the intention of the buyer? And that's kind of the discipline within, a lot of solution providers, out of Tel Aviv, they have that, story-based analysis approach. And that's really, I think, the sort of, that's much better than sort of red flag, green flag counting.
Conjunction of signals leads to narrative versus like standalone signal is like, conjunction of signals shows a bit of a trend, so to speak, versus, hey, we've seen a lot of AVS no's lately, that kind of leaves you in the dark. Is that kind of?
Yeah, yeah, because interestingly enough, like manual review is very difficult for some folks with specific sort of mindsets and approaches, because they want, okay, if A equals B, I'm going to this and this and this. It's like it takes context based thinking, and a VPN might be there's no risk associated with that at all for this transaction, but a VPN on this other transaction in conjunction with these other things, it's actually very meaningful. So it takes that sort of context-based thinking approach to really do it the right way. And that's not for everyone.
For sure. For sure. You maybe had to spend a little bit of time on the phones to think a little bit outside the box.
Right. Yeah.
Ryan asks, and Ryan is here, so Ryan can double down on it. If Ryan, if I could do your voice real quick without doing your voice. Coby, what are your thoughts on the more targeted phishing bait used in these attempts that lead to social engineering being more effective. For example, the texts I'm getting, which Ryan was shared on LinkedIn a couple of days ago, you should definitely check those out. The texts I'm getting are forcing one or two support numbers for me to call, and I don't fully trust the Google search I'm running to find the correct support channel to work through. How can we best support consumers in these scenarios that are being given a recommended next step, which may be a disaster to a non-informed user or someone in tough emotional states to not act on right away? Speaking more on the human element of things. Ryan, I'll let you add in there if you've got any. But Coby would love to hear what you think about this like onslaught. I'm sure all of you are getting these wild text messages these days, and how we kind of look out for the most vulnerable, or maybe those who are a little too quick on the draw.
Yeah. Was there any more? Ryan adding more before I answer, or should I just jump in?
Nope. Vito did a great deep fake of me. I appreciate that, Vito.
Yeah. Wait, you're a different person than me? Okay. Yeah, got it. Yeah, so that's a great question. In 2019, I wrote this article which got a lot of traction about how I fell for a scam. And so I titled it like how a fraud expert, fell for a fraud scam. And it was a very sophisticated social engineering, phone number spoofing, the person that the bad actor called me spoofed Capital One's number, and I was busy and I was trying to do a bunch of things at once. But I think it's a mixture of sort of consumer education. Like when I do a Zelle transfer now, let's pretend I use Chase. I'm not going to say which banks I use, but if I was using Chase, they might ask me, are you sure you know this person? And do you know them this way? Do you know them this way? Do you know them this way? And they force me to check a box before I can complete that. That is a lot of friction. I'm not saying that's a universal great idea. It's not a great idea for everyone. But I think it's a mixture of education and then maybe presenting the user, depending on the risk profile, with something they have to do to kind of answer a question. And then just it's tricky because a lot of companies don't want to publish phone numbers because they don't want to have volumes coming into their call center, but you have to have something that the customer can go to know that, okay, this is the right phone number. But I do think social engineering is, one of the more tricky things to detect and to mitigate. And it's not going to get any easier, with generative AIs. But yeah, make sure of user education and having a clean path for customers to actually go to reach you.
I like that. That's kind of what my thoughts were as well. As I like what Zelle's forcing, because like what you said with the consumer education, it's not so much like what is it, but it's always this could never happen to me. So how do you create situational awareness in a proactive sense? And if I'm a user and I'm thinking about it the right way, and Zelle is now forcing step-up authentication, maybe there's another thing they could do to, remind users, these are the types of things you should think about before sending money to someone, not us covering our ass so we're not responsible for authorized push payments or anything like that, which is really what they're doing. But at the end of the day, how do you take that step and make it palatable for the consumer, not as just a step to complete, but as intelligence to retain?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well said. Yeah, well said. Absolutely. I agree with you.
Cool. Thank you for answering that, though. And I apologize, Vito. I have to drop and actually go get some work done. So I'm really glad I got that one in there, Coby.
We're kicking you out, man. You got to get out of here, dude. Good to see you, brother. Wait, we're going from Ryan to Brian here now, because Brian, you got to stick around for this one. No, he's gone. Brian asks, how do you think about balancing people just mind-numbingly clicking through the consumer education that is more of a check the box, right? Maybe is there some sort of like page time on that we look for how quickly someone does that, and then are we getting back to like CAPTCHA based stuff? It's what great question, Brian, because it's one of those snake eating its tail things. Like how do we get past someone who's just so used to I agree to terms and conditions. Who cares? Da 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 da.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would just be speculating with my own personal, it's more brainstorming, but really like differentiating a visual, like a user experience. I'm very opinionated about UXD and design. I have a strong appreciation for it. So whether it's creative use of colors, whether it's like a specific image that's like, like, wait, what is that? This is not a generic looking form. I think companies are, maybe not really thinking about ways to make things visually differentiating. And it's very easy, to use a different color. To your point, you said terms and conditions. If you go to terms and conditions for any company, it's like blocks of text and checkboxes. There is no, things that are calling out certain things. So I think that's where I would go if I was trying to redesign, those types of experiences and differentiate them from, what's typical.
That's brilliant. I never ever thought there was an aesthetic solution to that. I love it. That's so cool. Toy asks, this is Google search leading first to phishing scam site OptiBet. It popped up to me with a full article citing some Estonian CEO making the mistake of entering wrongly 500 euros. Toy, why don't you tell us about this? This is a wild story we've got here. The tactics are subtle.
Well, I just would like to share how good the scammers are nowadays, because this is a real story. As you see, the link is still available. And if you type Optibet 500 euros, it brings you the first page, and it is actually a phishing site. And I already enter the two numbers, my phone number and my ID card code, and then I stop. And I am a fraud agent, I checking around, I checked everything. I couldn't see the same news officially posted elsewhere in official newspaper. I tried to look for the profile of the CEO. I couldn't see anything. So I guess it is a scam. But then when you look at it, it's so real. All the comments from different people, and comments in a real way, not AI generated. There's everything there, like the sense of urgency. You have only 1 day more because according to EU legislation, you cannot just change it right away. So you have to wait for 7 days, and tomorrow is the last day. So today is still your chance to go for it. It's
Brilliant.
so persuading.
Yeah. You bring up a
Persuasive.
fantastic point here, Toy. And maybe this gets us to where the wagon is taking us in the future. Toy's bringing up the fact that this website was so easily and convincingly spoofed. And Coby, I'm just curious if we're talking about fraud prevention for, I'm in-house at Major League Baseball, and I'm worried about fraud prevention. How much of my time is going into spotting dupes, spotting scam impersonation sites? I mean, if anybody goes on Facebook and you look at those sponsored ads in the top right, you're always gonna see, Timberland boots for $5 or, you know, amazing knives for like $3.99, stuff like that. Is that part and parcel of the fraud analyst's playbook nowadays to be on the lookout for impersonation?
Got it. Yeah. So I think for like the average merchant, not as much, but maybe sometimes. But if you're like a financial, company, or I think in this example is like a iGaming company. Yeah, I think there's the whole brand reputation aspect. There's people kind of describe trust and safety and fraud sometimes interchangeably, sometimes different. But I see that more as like a trust and safety function than maybe like fraud detection. I watched a very interesting demo from a company called Sardine a few weeks ago on one of the MRC community calls, and they showed it was based on generative AI attacks, and they showed how you can use a generative AI tool to copy an e-commerce website, right? So they made like a clone of I think it was like Lululemon or some apparel company within a few minutes, and I was like, wow, that does look like a legitimate website. But what I think about is kind of like a couple years ago when we would see the first iteration of generative AI photos. Like the faces will look weird, like that guy has 5 fingers. This is AI, right? My theory is that right now, at least, any sort of generative AI, clone website is probably not going to be perfect. There's going to be subtle details that are slightly off. Maybe you're not going to see copyright 2025 or something like that. So I think there'll be kind of signals and traces that consumers can use to spot, and industry should actively be working on that right now to say like, hey, here's what a fictitious website looks like. The navigation is going to be off. Maybe home is spelt wrong, maybe contact us doesn't actually have contact us details, just things like that. And I'm kind of just thinking out loud, but that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, Silk Spectre. There was a big story on Silk Spectre a few months ago, and the dead tell for me was just the URLs. Like everything looked convincing graphically, but then the URL is just, Timberland dot veto. It's just garbage. Like, but to the same, now we're getting a little sociological here, to the same point about, I don't read terms and conditions, to the same point of like, I just breeze through whatever, like get me what I want now. Who's going to stop there? And can we even or who's going to stop and look there? And can we even prevent people? Is this some sort of like evolutionary thing? I hate to put it that way, but like, if you weren't worried about what's beyond that cliff ledge, there was only so much I could do for you, you know? That I'm also thinking out loud here too. I don't know if you can answer the evolutionary questions, Coby. But
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the 1990s, like you could go to a flea market and buy counterfeit goods, and did someone know they were buying something counterfeit? Sometimes they didn't. Maybe the sketchy offline merchant would be like, no, this is legitimate. It's hard to stop that. You know what I mean? You can try to mitigate it, but it's existed for a long time. A lot of people think of the Secret Service as being, founded to protect the president, but it was founded to actually solve counterfeit currency, right?
Yes,
So
sir.
the problem of counterfeiting has, existed for over 100 years. It's not going to go away. We just have to, do our best to try to be creative and stopping it.
It sounds like job security to me. So, speaking of job security, come on, we got so many great people out here. Justin, Becca, Shelly, Morgan, Paul, Paula, Matthew, Taylor. I'm sure you have some sort of curiosity and questions around everything we've talked about today with Coby. The doors are open, my friends. Would love to hear from y'all, especially in regards to what you're seeing now and, what you would lean on an expert consultant to kind of figure out. Floor is yours.
Vito, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Matthew, how you doing?
Doing well. Hope you are. So I do have a question, Coby, in regards to, I think what you were getting at with the balancing, the human element and the AI element, kind of that balancing act. That I agree with you. I think that's the key. I don't think we can lean on one and stress one more than the other. I think there is a balancing act. Can you share a little bit about your experience with that? Meaning, I've had, everybody has different opinions, but like I've had some people say that, the AI machine learning is like, it's got like a 60% false positive rate for some of the different tools that people have been looking at, and then, kind of thing. So can you share any insight in what you've learned with kind of a hybrid way of going about fraud analytics with the human element and the AI element?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And you make a great point about, the inconsistency of AI, right? And false positive rates. About a year ago, when ChatGPT started becoming buzzy, every every solution provider, they updated their marketing from the term machine learning to AI. And I remember being on, phone calls like, wait, AI is, they're thinking of it as ChatGPT. We're doing, supervised and not like what's going on. And it's really kind of capitalizing on the buzziness of the term. So not all AI is, gonna be equal. But as far as the balancing act, it's really just, I would say, a sort of formalized relationship between field people in the field, ops, customer service, fraud ops, and then data science functions, and then having some sort of governance, whether it's case review or escalation. There should always be some sort of committee of senior leaders that consistently review customer escalations, or some sort of problem. If they have like a spike in declines and they have upset customers, someone should be doing a postmortem analysis and understanding that. So I think it's really just having a formalized program to ensure that these two disciplines and teams are in constant communication, and then having some sort of committee or audit or control on how it's working. So a lot of companies, it's a human thing. They put something in place and they don't really think about how are we going to manage this and iterate on it. So that's kind of how I think about that.
To double click on that, and this is a Coby question, but it's an everyone question too. What do you think works in terms of a formal way of tracking customer call-ins, customer contact, because that's what everyone always asks. Like if we see a spike in customer contact, then we know something happened, and then we kind of need to dig in there and see the veracity of that contact. Was it just fraudsters trying to get through and socially engineer, or was it truly, Jane Doe who got false positively declined? Do you know, or general broad strokes about like what kind of works? Is it just one big messy Google Doc, or is there something else that you've seen work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably less opinionated about like tactical tools, but more like just like frameworks. I think a lot of companies are using up like sort of uptick alert, mechanisms, which I think are super helpful. When I used to work at PayPal, every day we had a fraud uptick report that someone would review. So we see an anomalous spike in something. Someone had to see what was going on with that spike. So I think having alert mechanisms where it's just like, okay, this is what we expect. Everyone is forecasting, incoming calls or emails. But now, okay, we're seeing a spike. First, having an alert mechanism to alert, leaders that, okay, we are seeing a spike, and then having a process to investigate that spike, and then actually report back on what that spike was. The whole, business is going to be much more informed, and they're going to know how to respond to it. So that's kind of what comes to mind there.
Matthew, how do you feel about the ability to kind of surface that spike on the phones and any sort of like preparedness for that? Is it something you're already doing, or is there kind of like a gray area there?
There's a gray area. I think a lot of that falls back to the company, the compartmentalization of the company. You got a team handling a piece of what Coby said. You got another team handling another piece of what Coby just said, and trying to get everybody together. I do like the holistic governance piece where you've got multiple people from different parts of the organization involved in like a governance type committee or whatever you want to call it. I like that. And that's a way to kind of hold AI, machine learning, whatever you want to call it, hold it accountable, so to speak, Um, I'm thinking through what that would look like in our organization and how that would work. But I'm assuming kind of where you're going is also like a net promoter score and kind of the breakdown of what an NPS would be saying from, what are the biggest issues that customer care is seeing from that type. I mean, so it's just something for us to chew on. I don't have an answer at this point. I just kind of got to chew on it for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier. It's easier in concept for sure than execution. I mean, everyone here is, tenured professionals, and I'm sure everyone has their own experience working at a company where some departments are almost adversarial. You're like, hey, you're doing this and you're impacting my conversion. Everyone's getting rated on employee, performance and stuff like that. So I think that gets in the way sometimes of that clean communication because everyone's sort of focused on their own goals. And that's why I think it's kind of important to have someone that is a program manager for those things. So they can actually make sure that, yeah, these departments are focused on accomplishing their individual goals, but we have this, broader, goal of making sure we're monitoring these things. I think that can go a long way because they're going to be less biased, but that requires a company investing in a role like that. Companies are trying to minimize costs. So I can understand why it's more difficult for some.
Well, I've got one home run final question for you. And in 2 minutes, of course you can answer in 2 minutes. It's such an easy one. It comes from my good friend, Brian Davis. What types of signals, the alarm should be spinning right now. What types of signals do you think would show an AI shopping agent was compromised? Visa, MasterCard, PayPal are all prepping the launch of their own agentic commerce agents. It wouldn't quite be an ATO. It seems to me a new fraud vector forming. It seems to me that that's where the frontier is. Coby, how are you feeling about agentic commerce and how we can all kind of get ahead of when good bots go bad?
Yeah, great question. I was talking to this company, Castle.io. I really like them a couple weeks ago, and I was like, I think that's going to be a problem. And their head of research, he has a bot detection background, and he's like, I don't think it's going to be as much of a problem. So we kind of had a different opinion there. I think this is a problem for bot experts, and bots, scripts, whatever. They're going to have certain signatures. I think over time there's going to need to be a standardization. Kind of like when you go to websites like HTTPS, it's secure, versus not. You're going to have some sort of agreed upon signature. And that's going to require industry to actually come together to say, hey, we're doing agentic AI commerce, we need to have some sort of signature that lets companies know this is legitimate. And that's going to require a bunch of fraud happening first. It's going to require a bunch of mistakes. But I think it's too early to say what the solution is. But that's kind of what I see as like some sort of standardized, agreed upon signature. And that's going to require the participation of companies that are doing these things.
I got one more for you. My good friend Shelly here put this worry into my head, and now I got to put it out into the world. Shelly, you were saying, hey, agentic commerce, like bring it on. Like, come on, buy everything. But who's liable for it at the end of the day? Like, who is going to be left holding the bag? Coby, this is kind of like a vamp style question. Like, have you heard anything? Have you heard anything? Have you heard anything or anyone here about whether or not, let's say, Visa's agent goes out and buys me 9,000 pairs of pants because I'm getting a better unit price on them? You know, is it just like caveat emptor? Do I have any say? Is there going to be any recourse? Do you know anything about that? Or is it just kind of like, well, we'll see?
So I don't know, but I can kind of speculate on an opinion. So I think it's going to take industry seeing what is the actual risk of it, right? Because we're all speculating now. Having worked for American Express and Discover Network, and then also merchants, financial companies, quite obvious, they're very conservative, right? Discover does everything. Discover Network does everything that Visa does. Visa and Mastercard, they hold the power. They set regulations. Everyone, Amex, Discover, they sort of match them to be at parity. And they're going to, if they see it's as low financial risk, maybe they'll take the liability. If they see a lot of financial risk, they're not going to sign up to take that risk. They're going to put some more thought into it. So I think we're going to have to wait and to see what the actual losses are. And then, the conservative financial companies are going to sort of set the policies.
Stay tuned, my friends. I mean, that's a setup for round 2 of this. Coby, bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for taking the time with us. I think we've all learned a whole lot, and it's just great to hear from someone who's got the experience and like really just perspective that you have. That deal with the aesthetics around a kind of pop up. We're putting friction into friction meets Frida Kahlo. I like that a lot. That's what we're going to spin off here. For all of you, thanks for coming out. It's a true blessing to be with you every Wednesday. It's even more of a blessing when I'm safe at home and not in the Las Vegas airport. But until next time, my friends, please, Coby, I'm putting you out there. Reach out to Coby. You can find him on LinkedIn. Coby, is there anything else you'd like to hype in terms of where people could reach out to you, or any projects you're working on? Any parting words that you got for the crew?
No, I mean, you pretty much covered it. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I've been pretty active lately, posting just thoughts and stuff like that. And I'll just say, I don't think I have all the answers. I just like to throw out ideas and encourage discussion. And I'm happy to engage with anyone that's interested in engaging.
Well, we appreciate you engaging with us today. Go out, my friends, create debate, make this world a safer place. Y'all are the best. I'll see you next Wednesday. Until then, have an awesome rest of your week, y'all.